Hello and welcome back to Mining Stock Daily with me, Paul Harris. Today we're talking about silver exploration in Latin America, specifically in Bolivia, and I've great pleasure to be joined by Andrew Williams, President of New Pacific Metals. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Now, you've been in the President role at New Pacific for, about 6 months now, so maybe let's start there. What was it that was attractive to you about coming on to a silver explorer in Latin America?
Yeah, it's funny that time flies. I guess when you're having fun, it has been 6 months. I was previous to New Pacific Metals. I spent 11 years on the buy side at a well-known institutional investment firm. I was a portfolio manager and really came to appreciate just how rare big new discoveries are in our industry. You might get one every few years or so, and that's really the critical raw ingredient for any great story, any great mining company, is to have a real asset. There's hundreds of juniors out there, and very few have big, high-grade, high-margin assets. And New Pacific certainly made a splash in 2020, 2021 with the discovery of their Silver Sand project. And more recently, flying under the radar, they've made a second major discovery at their Karangus project. And to have two big discoveries like this within one company really highlighted to me that New Pacific was onto something special. And to make the discoveries is certainly one monumental feat, but to graduate and start and to translate that discovery into something that you can finance and build and operate is a totally separate feat that involves a larger team and a different skill set. And so that was something that our CEO, Rui Fang, recognized, and we started chatting late last year and learning that he was in team building mode. And after 11 years on the buy side, I was always curious about what life was like on the corporate side. And so there was an opportunity there for us to come together. And early January, I hopped on a plane and spent 2 weeks in Bolivia, did my due diligence, visited all the projects, met the team in La Paz. And it was January 24th that I joined the company.
Congratulations there. A lot to talk about today. Silver Sand is in the Potosi department. In 2022, the company put out a PEA, 14-year mine life, 39% post-tax IRR, about 10 million ounce a year production, $308 million capex, all-in sustaining cost of just over $10 per ounce. Good figures. Now you're engaged in sort of permitting, and a pre-feasibility study is within the plans before the end of the year. Tell us about the work on the PFS. How's that shaping up? Is that going to be much different from the PEA? Can we expect any differences there?
Yeah, great. The short answer is no real scope changes. We did a lot of upfront technical work as part of that PEA. Your typical PEA is done to either it's plus minus 35 or plus minus 50% accuracy level. We put a lot more work into our Silver Sand PEA. 90% of that resource was measured and indicated, which is, again, unusual. And we did a ton of front-end work with the flow sheet. There was a raging debate about whether or not the silver at Silver Sand was better recovered by a heap leach or tank leaching. And that trade-off work we completed prior to the PEA. We ultimately went with tank leaching. Because we did a lot of that front-end loading as part of the PEA study, we don't really expect any material scope changes as part of the PFS. There's little things like we've had some good news stories potentially on pit wall angles. The rock seems to be, we've got some additional geotechnical feedback from some work we've done that suggests that the rock is competent, more competent than we expected. Recoveries, we're seeing slightly lower cyanide consumption, potentially maybe a little bit of an improvement in recoveries, but these are all fairly small things in and around the edges. But broadly speaking, the 11,000 ton a day crush grind, leach, pour silver doré bars, large open pit operation, those broad brush assumptions are going to be unchanged in the PFS.
Okay, thank you. Now, one of the key things that the company will still need is you've negotiated a production contract with state mineral company Comibol. If I remember correctly, that was negotiated a couple of years ago, but yet that's still to be signed and ratified. What's the outlook on that happening, and why is that taking so long?
Yeah, great question. I think So the MPC, we signed it, as you mentioned, a couple years ago, and it's a document that really unlocks additional ground around our 100% owned silver sand claims that host the vast majority of our resources and the economics in the PEA and PFS. So it's really a surrounding area for us. And so we signed it with Comabol, the Bolivian state-owned mining company, as a joint venture, an additional, I think it was a 6% royalty that we agreed on any minerals that are discovered and mined on the Commonwealth ground. However, the catch has always been that contract, as per Bolivia, has to be ratified in a parliamentary session. And so since that was signed, there was a transitional government that lasted for just under a year, and then we've gotten into a new government. There's been I'd say some politics to a certain extent, just with bodies changing around every time the government changes, as is typical in any Latin American country. As there's new people that are brought in, they got to review the file. So I think we've been a little bit of a victim to some of the changing bodies. That's taken some time. So, and I think secondly, going back to the team building, we've also hired, what's new this year, a dedicated person on that file internally, someone who was previously senior in a government role here in Bolivia. And he's been really active on the file, dealing with Comabol, rebuilding those relationships, and ultimately stick handling that through the different processes it needs to get to in order for it to be ratified. So I'd say it was a combination of some political change that then necessitated some new bodies, which then had to review the file. Plus, I think for the first time, from a management standpoint, we've got the bandwidth to push that through. So we're hopeful that we can get something done here over the second half of this year or into next year on that MPC.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Karangas project. While you've been advancing with Silver Sand, obviously you go into that sort of quiet mode because you're not necessarily doing the drilling and other things that generate a lot of news flow. But your recent news flow has been coming from Karangas, where you've been drilling and you've been putting out a lot of results. Before we talk specifically about the project, though, let me ask, do you need a Comabol contract for that, for a potential development scenario there as well?
Our Karangas drilling, if you look at the map, all of it's been on our 100% owned claims. Similar to Silver Sand, there is a piece of ground that surrounds us. It's a small section that is right now not owned by Comabol. It's not actually owned by anyone. It's been reverted back to the state, and Comabol's got first right to make that claim should they choose to do so. That's a process that we need to go through with them. But then surrounding that, we've got another big 100% owned exploration license. And it's a much smaller piece at Carangas, but yes, ultimately we will have to go through that at some point down the road, but it's nowhere near as significant as it is at Silver Sand. And the other tailwind for us is operating in Bolivia. We're going to go through the process with the MPC Comabol at Silver Sand, and we're going to learn a huge amount about that process and what it takes to be successful. And we would expect that a similar process at Carangas should be a lot smoother than what we've encountered thus far at Silver Sand.
Okay, thank you. Now, at Carangas, the company's got a 1,000-metre by 800-metre silver horizon that you're exploring. That's been going very well. You're looking at putting out a mineral resource estimate very soon, and then a PEA, preliminary economic assessment, by year end. Tell us about Carangas. Why is that such a special deposit?
Yeah, it's big. Number one, it comes right to surface. It's broad. So you look at the size of it, because it comes to surface and because it's broad, it lends itself to open pit mining at a potentially favorable strip ratio. The metallurgical response, based on preliminary test work we've completed, is really good. We get very high flotation recoveries. The top 200 meters, we've got a silver zinc lead zone that we'll be looking to produce a concentrate. We had great flotation response, in particular in the fresh component of that silver horizon, which is most of the deposit there. And then at depth, there's a gold zone, which we've run some preliminary bottle roll tests on. We got 98% recovery independent of what the sulfur content is, which is told us that it's free milling, that gold. It's actually a free electrum. And when you layer on the size of it, as you mentioned, the footprint, the geometry and what that means for a strip ratio, the metallurgy, and then in addition to that, we also released a few months ago a new geophysical survey because the Carangus discovery was really undercover. There was some drilling that was done by Battle Mountain in the 90s, the company that was ultimately acquired by Newmont, and they drilled some outcrop and figured that was the Carangus system, whereas we traced the mineralization from the West Dome to the East Dome and into the Central Valley undercover, and that's really where we made our discovery. And I think it was a year ago we ran an IP survey that was shallower, and it gave us a bunch of noise that really wasn't all that valuable to us. But now, because we've made this discovery undercover, we ran a new IP survey. I think it's at 300-400 meters below surface, and some really interesting anomalies have lit up, one of which is actually our discovery, so we know that the IP survey is calibrated. But what this tells us is, not only have we made this one discovery, but we still have the potential for this to be one of several in a larger district. A lot of positive attributes. I think our drill success has been really good. Every hole we've drilled in the top silver zone has hit mineralization, and we've had a very high hit rate in the gold zone at depth. So yeah, we're really encouraged by it. I think we haven't released the resource yet, but if you did your own back of the envelope, you could quickly identify that this is a bigger system than what we found at Silver Sand. Yeah, we're really excited, and we feel like we haven't really got any credit for it in our share price, and so this upcoming resource estimate will be an important milestone for the company, and we're on schedule to be releasing that in the first week or two of August.
Okay, thank you. Now, as I've mentioned throughout this conversation, you've got various studies and reports coming out, resource at Carangus, PA at Carangus, PFS coming out on Silver Sand all this year. What's the game plan going forward?
At Silver Sand, specifically, so we'll have the PFS study done by the end of this year, and then I think going to full feasibility study next year, that's a business decision that we'll have to make. Again, it'll depend on whether or not we're the ones that will go down the path of financing and building, or whether it's someone else that will do it for us, a different third party, corporate. There's multiple paths, as you might appreciate. A deposit of the quality and size of Silver Sand attracts corporate interest. We need to make that decision, but if we did go down the path of trying to build it ourselves, then I think what's become apparent is that you can get significantly better financing terms with a full feasibility study. Most of the large banks, they need to see that as a box-checking exercise. So we may take some time next year to complete that, should we go down that path. And as well, buttoning up whatever is remaining of our ongoing permitting efforts. So that'll be a sort of a 2024 story for Silver Sand. And then for Carangus, so hopefully by end of this year, or more realistically Q1 of next year, we'll have our PEA study. So we're going to be kicking off in the second half of this year our baseline environmental program, our baseline social program, archaeological studies, and then excitingly we're going to hopefully get in and drill those IP anomalies that I mentioned earlier. And then into next year, I would expect us to continue the momentum and upgrade our PEA to a PFS study, and continue to progress it down the traditional track. There's still, again, Carangus is a bigger project than Silver Sand, so it's going to take some intensive study, which will hopefully, we got a great team, and we'll continue to build on what we've learned this year into next year.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Now, this could be a good time to talk about market sentiment, because if you're looking to sell the project or even raise money to build it, market sentiment's obviously a key thing. Primary silver deposits are quite rare, or very rare. You've got a couple of precious metals producers on your share register in the shape of Silvercorp and Pan American Silver. How do you see market sentiment at the moment for silver projects?
Yeah, it's challenging for sure. If a couple recent conferences we've been to, the attendance has been somewhat light, which is the general feedback, talking to bankers, etc. That sentiment is fairly pervasive across the industry. You just look at the basket of silver miners, silver developers, share prices recently. It's very clear that this sector hasn't really received a lot of love, which it's fine. I think this is a cyclical industry, and we do what we can to adapt. I think for us, if you look at Rui Feng and his track record with Silvercorp, New Pacific, etc., Silvercorp hasn't raised a new share in, I think, since 2010 or 2011. They're very mindful of shareholder dilution, and many of us here at New Pacific are shareholders ourselves. So I think, what it does is I think it's no secret that pre-revenue companies such as ourselves, we need to use the public equity markets to finance our ongoing efforts. And when market sentiment is weaker, maybe we're just a little bit more cautious with how much money we pull on the balance sheet in order to protect our share count. Again, that's really been one of the secrets to Rui's success over the years, and we certainly share that philosophy internally. And then as far as corporate interest goes, we have to continue to press forward and just see where it goes. But you're right, it's certainly not frothy out there, but that's fine. It's a cyclical business, and like I said, many of the guys we have on our team have been doing it for a long time, and this is nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay, I wish you the best of luck with the publication of the upcoming studies, and look forward to sort of reading those as and when they come out. New Pacific Metals trades on the TSX under NUAG and on the NYSE American under NEWP. Andrew Williams, President of the company, thank you very much for joining us today.